Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reading Rainbows. We're going to be continuing Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. And today's chapter is Chapter 4, A House Full of Books. There is a sort of busy worm that will the fairest book deform. Their tasteless tooth will tear and taint the poet, patriot, sage, or saint. Nor sparing wit nor learning, now if you'd know the reason why, the best of reasons I'll supply, 'tis bread to the poor varmin. And that's by J. Doriston, quoted by W. Blades. Meggie woke up because it was so quiet. The regular sound of the engine that had lulled her to sleep had stopped. The driver's seat beside her was empty. It took Meggie a little while to remember why she wasn't in bed at home. Tiny dead flies were stuck to the windshield, and the van was parked outside an iron gate. It looked alarming, with sharp, ashen-gray spikes, a gate made of spearheads just waiting to impale anyone who tried to clamber over. It reminded Meggie of one of her favorite stories, the tale of the selfish giant who wouldn't let children into his garden. This was exactly how she had imagined his garden gate. Yeah, it's interesting the perspectives of children, thinking of it as, spikes ready to impale and all that. Most adults would look at it and just go, oh, that's just a pretty gate. Whereas kids, will see all sorts of stuff in what they're seeing. Mo was standing in the road with Dustfinger. Meggie got out and went over to them. On the right of the road, a densely wooded slope fell steeply to the bank of a wide lake. The hills on the other side rose from the lake like giants emerging from the depths. I like that description. Yeah, picturing the hills as giants emerging from the depths. The water was almost black, and pale twilight, darkly reflected in the waves, was already spreading across the sky. The first lights were coming on in the houses on the bank, looking like glowworms or fallen stars. A lovely place, isn't it? Mo put his arm around Meggie's shoulders. I know you like stories about robbers. See that ruined castle? A notorious robber band once lived there. I must ask Eleanor about them. She knows everything about this lake. And here's Mo just, trying to comfort Meggie, tell her stories and stuff to ease her mind a little. Meggie just nodded and rested her head against his shoulder. She was so tired she felt quite dizzy, but for the first time since they had set off, Mo's face wasn't looking grim with anxiety. Where does she live, then? Asked Meggie, stifling a yawn. Not behind that spiky gate. Actually, yes. This is the entrance to her property. Not very inviting, is it? Mo laughed and led Meggie across the road. Eleanor is very proud of this gate. She had it specially made. It's copied from a picture in a book. So, here we have, another indication that Eleanor loves books, and her life is sort of based from books. A picture of the selfish giant's garden? Murmured Meggie, peering through the intricately twining iron bars. The selfish giant? Mo laughed. No, I think it was another story, although that one would suit Eleanor pretty well. Tall hedges grew on both sides of the gate, their thorny branches hiding any view of what lay beyond. But even through the iron bars, Meggie could see nothing promising except for tall rhododendron bushes and a broad gravel drive that soon disappeared between them. Looks like you have rich relations, Dustfinger whispered in her ear. Yes, Eleanor is quite rich, said Mo, drawing Meggie away from the gate. But she'll probably end up poor as a church mouse because she spends so much money on books. He's one to talk, considering the image we got earlier of the books piled everywhere in their house, books in the kitchen and books in the bathroom and books piled on the floor because there just wasn't enough room on the bookshelves. I think she'd sell her soul to the devil without thinking twice if he offered her the right book for it. He pushed the heavy gate open with a single movement. "What are you doing?" asked Meggie in alarm. "We can't just drive in." For there was a sign beside the door, still clearly legible even if some of the letters were partially hidden by the leaves of the hedge. "Private property, no unauthorized entry." Meggie didn't think it sounded very inviting. Mo, however, only laughed. "Don't worry," he said, opening the gate wider. "The only thing Eleanor guards with a burglar alarm is her library. She couldn't care less who walks through this gate. She's not what you'd call a nervous woman, and she doesn't have very many visitors anyway." "What about dogs?" Dustfinger peered anxiously into the strange garden. "That gate suggests at least 3 ferocious dogs to me. Big ones, the size of calves." But Mo just shook his head. "Eleanor hates dogs," he said, going back to the van. "Okay, get in." Eleanor's grounds were more like a wood than a garden. Once they were through the gateway, the drive curved, as if taking a deep breath before going on up the slope, then lost itself among dark firs and chestnut trees, which grew so close together their branches made a tunnel. Meggie was just thinking it would never end when the trees suddenly receded, and the drive brought them to an open space covered with gravel and surrounded by carefully tended rose beds. Yeah, again, I just love that image of, driving through the tunnel of trees. And then coming out to see the rose beds and all, it seems so homey and inviting to me. Like, that's where I'd probably be sitting out in the woods, reading if I had a place like that. A gray station wagon stood on the gravel in front of a house that was bigger than the school Meggie had been attending for the last year. She tried to count the windows, but soon gave up. It was a very beautiful house, but looked just as uninviting as the iron gate. Perhaps it was only the evening twilight that made the ochre yellow of the plaster look so dirty. And perhaps the green shutters were closed only because night was already falling over the surrounding mountains. Perhaps. But Meggie would have bet her last book they were seldom open, even in the daytime. Yeah. Just think of houses that you've seen that you know nothing of the people inside them. You just see the house, and just from the looks of the house, you just get the feeling of whether, this is, a house with a family with kids, or, a house belonging to someone who's very open and inviting and friendly versus a house that, just seems foreboding and the whole house practically screams, "Stay away." The dark wooden front door looked as forbidding as a tightly closed mouth, and Meggie involuntarily reached for Mo's hand as they approached it. Dustfinger followed warily, with his battered backpack over his shoulder. Gwyn was probably still asleep inside it. When Mo and Meggie went up to the door, he kept a couple of steps behind them, looking uneasily at the closed shutters, as if he suspected that the mistress of the house was watching them from one of the windows. And I can totally see that, Someone who's that reclusive, I mean, I'm sure she heard the van pull up, and so she's there, watching out the window, seeing who's coming. Are they, just someone who got lost and is using the driveway to turn around, or, is it someone trying to sell something, and, just standing there watching and basically silently saying, "Go away, go away." There was a small barred window beside the front door, the only one not hidden behind green shutters. Below it was another notice. If you intend to waste my time on trivia, you'd better go away now." Meggie cast Mo an anxious glance, but he only made an encouraging face at her and pressed the bell. Meggie heard it ringing inside the big house, but nothing happened for quite a while. A magpie fluttered out of one of the rhododendron bushes growing near the house, and a couple of fat sparrows pecked busily at invisible insects in the gravel, but that was all. Meggie was just throwing them the breadcrumbs she had found in her jacket pocket, left over from a picnic on some long-forgotten day, when the door suddenly opened. The woman who came out was older than Mo, quite a lot older, although Meggie could never be quite sure how old grown-ups were. That's the thing about kids is, they can't really tell if someone's 20 or 50, To them, they're all grown-ups. They're all adults, and there's not much difference between one and the other in terms of how old they are. And also there's the fact that, a grumpy 50-year-old or a grumpy 20-year-old can look just as old as, a warm, welcoming, inviting 40-year-old. Her face reminded Meggie of a bulldog, but perhaps that was more her ferocious expression than its features. She wore a mouse-gray sweater and an ash-gray shirt, with a pearl necklace about her short neck and felt slippers on her feet, the kind of slippers Meggie had once had to wear when she and Mo had visited a historic castle. Eleanor's hair was gray too. She had pinned it up, but strands were hanging down everywhere, as if she had done it impatiently and in a hurry. She didn't look as if she spent much time in front of a mirror. Good heavens, Mortimer! What a surprise," she said, without wasting time on further greetings. "Where did you spring from?" Her voice sounded brusque, but her face couldn't entirely hide the fact that she was pleased to see Mo. Hello, Eleanor," said Mo, putting his hand on Meggie's shoulder. "Do you remember Meggie? As you can see, she's grown up quite a bit now." Eleanor cast Meggie a brief irritated glance. "Yes, so I see," she said. "It's only natural for children to grow, wouldn't you say? As far as I remember, it's been some years since I last set eyes on either you or your daughter. So to what do I owe the unexpected honor of your visit today? Are you finally going to take pity on my poor books?" "That's right," Mo nodded. One of my library commissions has been postponed. You know how libraries are always short on money." Meggie looked at him uneasily. She hadn't realized he could lie quite so convincingly. And here we see that Meggie's starting to realize that there's more to her father than just, bookbinder and, playful father, She's starting to sort of see how, he can lie, how he can sort of act like a different person depending on who he's speaking to. That he's not just a two-dimensional character. "And because it was so sudden," Mo continued, "I couldn't find anywhere for Meggie to go, so I brought her with me. I know you don't like children, but Meggie won't leave jam on your books or tear out pages to wrap up dead frogs." Eleanor muttered something suspicious and scrutinized Meggie as if she thought her capable of any kind of disgraceful conduct, whatever her father might say. That untrusting look of adults when looking at kids. Thinking that kids are there just plotting all sorts of wrongdoing no matter what. "When you last brought her, we could at least put her in a playpen," she remarked coldly. "I don't suppose that would do now." Once again she looked Meggie up and down as if she were being asked to admit a dangerous animal to her house. Meggie felt her anger make the blood rise to her face. She wanted to go home, or get back in the camper van and go somewhere else, anywhere, so long as she didn't have to stay with this horrible woman whose cold pebble eyes were boring holes in her face. Eleanor's gaze moved from Meggie to Dustfinger, who was still standing in the background looking awkward. "And who's this?" She looked inquiringly at Mo. "Do I know him?" "This is Dustfinger, a friend of mine." Perhaps only Meggie noticed Mo's hesitation. "He wants to go on south, but maybe you could put him up for a night in one of your many rooms." Eleanor folded her arms. "Only on the condition that his name has nothing to do with the way he treats books," she said, "and he'll have to put up with rather Spartan accommodations in the attic, because my library has grown a great deal over the last few years. Nearly all my guest bedrooms are full of books." Yeah, this woman's real inviting, "Oh yeah, he'll have to sleep in the attic because, I've just got so many books, I've got nowhere else for him." "How many books do you have?" asked Meggie. She had grown up among piles of books, but even she couldn't imagine there were books behind all the windows of this huge house. Eleanor inspected her again, this time with unconcealed contempt. "How many?" she repeated. "Do you think I count them like buttons or peas? A very, very great many. There are probably more books in every single room of this house than you will ever read, and some of them are so valuable that I wouldn't hesitate to shoot you if you dared touch them. But because you're a clever girl, or so your father assures me, you wouldn't do that anyway, would you?" Again, this woman is just so... Ew. She cares more about books than even carrying on conversation with someone. Yeah, I would shoot you if you even so much as touched these books. That's harsh. Meggie didn't reply. Instead, she imagined standing on tiptoe and spitting 3 times into this old witch's face. However, Mo just laughed. "You haven't changed, Eleanor," he remarked. "A tongue as sharp as a paper knife. But I warn you, if you harm Meggie, I'll do the same to your beloved books." Well, at least her father's standing up for her. Eleanor's lips curled in a tiny smile. "Well said," she answered, stepping aside. "You obviously haven't changed either. Come in. I'll show you the books that need your help, and a few others as well." Meggie had always thought Mo had a lot of books. She never thought so again, not after setting foot in Eleanor's house. There were no haphazard piles lying around as they did at home. Every book obviously had its place. But where other people have wallpaper, pictures, or just an empty wall, Eleanor had bookshelves. The shelves were white and went right up to the ceiling in the entrance hall through which she had first led them, but in the next room and the corridor beyond it, the shelves were as black as the tiles on the floor. "These books," announced Eleanor with a dismissive gesture as they passed the closely ranked spines, "have accumulated over the years. They're not particularly valuable, most of mediocre quality, nothing out of the ordinary. Should certain fingers be unable to control themselves and take one off the shelf now and then," she added, casting a brief glance at Meggie, "I don't suppose the consequences would be too serious. Just so long as once those fingers have satisfied their curiosity, they put every book back in its proper place again, and don't leave any unappetizing bookmarks inside." Here Eleanor turned to Mo. "Believe it or not," she said, "I actually found a dried-up slice of salami used as a bookmark in one of the last books I bought, a wonderful 19th century first edition." Who would use salami as a bookmark? That's just... ew, I can just imagine how it would destroy the pages. And also, it would get moldy. I mean, I know she said that it was dried up, but, it's not going to just dry up without first stinking and getting gross and... Meggie couldn't help giggling, which naturally earned her another stern look. "It's nothing to laugh about, young lady," said Eleanor. "Some of the most wonderful books ever printed were lost because some fool of a fishmonger tore out their pages to wrap his stinking fish in. In the Middle Ages, thousands of books were destroyed when people cut up their bindings to make soles for shoes or to heat steam baths with their paper. The thought of such incredible abominations, even if they had occurred centuries ago, made Eleanor gasp for air. "Well, let's forget about that," she said, "or I shall get overexcited. My blood pressure is much too high as it is." She had stopped in front of a door that had an anchor with a dolphin coiled around it painted on the white wood. "This is a famous printer's special sign," explained Eleanor, stroking the dolphin's pointed nose with one finger. "Just the thing for a library door, eh?" "I know," said Meggie. "Aldous Minutius. He lived in Venice and printed books at the right size to fit into his customers' saddlebags." "Really?" Eleanor wrinkled her brow, intrigued. "I didn't know that. In any case, I am the fortunate owner of a book he printed with his own hands in the year 1503. "You mean it's from his workshop," Meggie corrected her. "Of course that's what I meant." Eleanor cleared her throat and gave Mo a reproachful glance, as if it could only be his fault that his daughter was precocious enough to know such things. Then she put her hand on the door handle. "No child," she said as she pressed the handle down with almost solemn reverence, "has ever before passed through this door. But as I assume your father has taught you a certain respect for books, I'll make an exception today. However, only on the condition that you keep at least 3 paces away from the shelves. Is that agreed?" For a moment Meggie felt like saying, "No, it wasn't." She would have loved to surprise Eleanor by showing contempt for her precious books, but she couldn't do it. Her curiosity was too much for her. She felt almost as if she could hear the books whispering on the other side of the half-open door. They were promising her 1,000 unknown stories, 1,000 doors into worlds she had never seen before. The temptation was stronger than Meggie's pride. Yeah, and again, I know that feeling of, I don't like what this person's saying, but I want to see their books. Yeah, I can feel them calling to me. Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, first thing to do when you walk into a person's house? Well, for me it's first, greet the animals. Second, so where do you keep your books? I want to see what your collection is like. That's me. "Agreed," she murmured, clasping her hands behind her back. 3 paces. Her fingers were itching with desire. "Sensible child," said Eleanor, so condescendingly that Meggie almost went back on her decision. But then they entered Eleanor's holy of holies. "You've had the place renovated," Meggie heard Mo say. He added something else, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was just staring at the books. The shelves on which they stood smelled of freshly sawn wood. They went all the way up to a sky-blue ceiling with tiny lights in it, hanging there like stars. Narrow wooden step-ladders on casters stood by the shelves, ready to help any reader up to the top shelves. There were reading desks with books lying open on them, held in place by brass chains that shone like gold. There were glass display cases containing books with pages stained by age but showing the most wonderful pictures. Meggie couldn't resist moving closer. One step forward, a quick glance at Eleanor, who luckily had her back turned, and she was right beside the display case. She bent lower and lower over the glass until her nose was touching it. Oh my God, I want to be in that room. I want a library like that. Just a room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Reading desks, yes, but also a nice comfy reading chair, get all snuggled up in. And just, I want a room like that. Prickly leaves twined around pale brown letters. A tiny red dragon's head was spitting out flowers over the stained paper. Riders on white horses looked at Meggie as if scarcely a day had passed since someone had painted them with tiny marten hairbrushes. A man and woman stood beside them, perhaps a bridal couple. A man with a bright red hat was looking angrily at them. "You call that 3 paces?" Meggie spun around in alarm, but Eleanor didn't seem too angry. "Yes, the art of illumination," she said. "Once only rich people could read, so the pictures painted around the letters were to help the poor to understand the stories too. Of course, no one planned to give them pleasure. The poor were put into the world to work, not to have a nice time or look at pretty pictures. That kind of thing was only for the rich. No, the idea was to instruct the poor. Usually the stories came from the Bible, and everyone knew them anyway. The books were put in churches, and a page was turned every day to show a new picture." That's a little bit of true history for you. Yeah, that is actually the truth. "What about this book?" asked Meggie. "I don't think this one was ever in a church," replied Eleanor. "Most likely it was made for a very rich man to enjoy. It's almost 600 years old." There was no missing the pride in her voice. "People have committed murder for such a book. Luckily, I only had to buy it." As she spoke these last words, she turned abruptly and looked at Dustfinger, who had followed them into the library, soundless as a prowling cat. For a moment, Meggie thought Eleanor would send him back into the corridor, but Dustfinger stood in front of the shelves looking so impressed, with his hands behind his back, that he gave her no reason to turn him out, so she just cast him a final distrustful glance and turned back to Mo. He was standing at one of the reading desks with a book in his hand, its spine hung only by a couple of threads. He held it very carefully, like a bird with a broken wing. Yeah, and again, it's just so easy for me to picture this. Mo standing there with this worn-out book, its binding, the spine hanging on barely and all, and him just, gently holding it, inspecting it, treating it like like they said, like a bird with a broken wing. Just caring so much for it. "Well," asked Eleanor anxiously, "can you save it? I know it's in terrible shape, and I'm afraid the others aren't in a much better way, but—" "Oh, that can all be fixed." Mo put the book down and inspected another. "But I think it will take me at least 2 weeks. If I don't have to get a hold of more materials, which could mean I need more time. Will you put up with us that long?" "Of course," Eleanor nodded, but Meggie noticed the glance she cast at Dustfinger. He was still standing beside the shelves near the door and seemed entirely absorbed in looking at the books, but Meggie sensed he'd missed none of what was said behind his back. There were no books in Eleanor's kitchen, not one, but they ate an excellent supper there at a wooden table that came, so Eleanor assured them, from the scriptorium of an Italian monastery. Meggie doubted it. As far as she knew, the monks had worked at desks with sloping tops in the scriptoria of their monasteries, but she kept this information to herself. I get the feeling that Eleanor's been ripped off more than once by people who knew about her love of books and all things books, and so, "Oh yeah, this table was, is from a monastery, it's real great and really rare, so you can have it for only, some extraordinary price that's way beyond what it's actually worth." Instead, she took another slice of bread and was just wondering how nice the cheese standing on his supposed scriptorium table would be when she noticed Mo whispering something to Eleanor. Since Eleanor's eyes widened greedily, Meggie concluded they could only be discussing a book, and she immediately thought of brown paper, a pale green linen binding, and the anger in Mo's voice. Beside her, Dustfinger surreptitiously slipped a slice of ham into his backpack for Gwen's supper. Meggie saw a round nose emerge from the pack, sniffling in the hopes of more delicacies. Dustfinger smiled at Meggie when he noticed her looking at him, and gave Gwen some more ham. He didn't seem to find anything odd about Mo and Eleanor's whispering, but Meggie was sure the two of them were planning something secret. After a short time, Mo rose from the table and went out. Meggie asked Eleanor where the bathroom was, and followed him. It was a strange feeling to be spying on Mo. She couldn't remember ever doing it before, except the night before when Dustfinger had arrived, and the time when she had tried to find out whether Mo was Santa Claus. She was ashamed of stealing after him like this, but it was his own fault. Why was he hiding the book from her? And now he might be going to give it to this Eleanor, a book Meggie wasn't allowed to see. Ever since Mo had hurriedly hidden it behind his back, Meggie hadn't been able to get it out of her head. She had even looked for it in Mo's bag before he loaded his things into the van, but she couldn't find it. Yeah, I love this image of, a little girl who's always, well, it's his fault that I'm spying on him. If only he told me the truth, I wouldn't have to spy. Yeah, that's just such a childish thought process, and just, in a way, adorable and endearing, and yet on the other hand, bratty, but, kids are brats, their brains aren't fully formed enough to think things through properly. She just had to see it before it disappeared, maybe into one of Eleanor's display cases. She had to know why it meant so much to Mo that, for its sake, he would drag her all the way here. He looked around once more at the entrance hall before leaving the house, but Meggie ducked down behind a chest just in time. The chest smelled of mothballs and lavender. She decided to stay in hiding there until Mo came back. He'd be sure to see her if she went outdoors. Time passed painfully slowly, as it always does when you're waiting for something with your heart thumping hard. The books in the white bookcases seemed to be watching Meggie, but they said nothing to her, as if they sensed that there was only one book Meggie could think about just now. If you see me looking off camera, it's because I've got one of my kitty cats here demanding attention. Sorry. Finally, Mo came back carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Perhaps he's just going to hide it here, thought Meggie. Where could you hide a book better than among 10,000 others? Yes, Mo was going to leave it here and then they'd drive home again. But I would like to see it, thought Meggie, just once before it's put on one of those shelves I'm supposed to stay 3 paces away from. Mo passed her so closely she could have touched him, but he didn't notice her. Meggie, don't look at me like that, he sometimes told her. You're reading my thoughts again. Now he looked anxious, as if he wasn't quite sure he was doing the right thing. Meggie counted slowly to 3 before following her father, but a couple of times Mo stopped so suddenly Meggie almost ran into him. He didn't return to the kitchen, but went straight to the library. Without looking back once, he opened the door with the Venetian printer's mark on it and closed it quietly behind him. So, there stood Meggie among all the silent books, wondering whether to follow him and ask him to show her the book. Would he be very angry? She was just about to summon up all her courage and go after him when she heard footsteps, rapid, firm footsteps, quick and impatient. That could only be Eleanor. Now what? Meggie opened the nearest door and slipped through it. A 4-poster bed, a dresser, silver-framed photographs, a pile of books on the bedside table, a catalog lying open on the rug, its pages full of pictures of old books. She was in Eleanor's bedroom. Heart thudding, she listened for noises outside. She could hear Eleanor's energetic footsteps and then the sound of the library door closing for the second time. Cautiously, she slipped out into the corridor again. She was still standing outside the library, undecided, when she felt a hand suddenly laid on her shoulder from behind. Another hand stifled her cry of alarm. "It's only me," breathed Dustfinger into her ear. "Keep quiet or we're both in trouble, understand?" Meggie nodded, and Dustfinger slowly took his hand away from her mouth. "Your father's going to give the old witch that book, right?" he whispered. "Has he taken it out of the van? Tell me. He did have it with him, didn't he?" Meggie pushed him away. "I don't know," she snapped. "Anyway, what business is it of yours?" "What business is it of mine?" Dustfinger laughed quietly. "Well, perhaps I'll tell you sometime, but just now all I want to know is whether you've seen it." Meggie shook her head. She didn't know why she was lying to Dustfinger. Perhaps because he had pressed his hand over her mouth a little too hard. Oh, the justifications. Please. "Meggie, listen to me." Dustfinger looked at her intently. His scars were like pale lines that someone had drawn on his cheeks. 2 slightly curved marks on the left cheek, a third and longer line on the right cheek running from ear to nostril. "Capricorn will kill your father if he doesn't get that book," hissed Dustfinger. "Kill him, do you understand? Didn't I tell you what he's like? He wants the book, and he always gets what he wants. It's ridiculous to believe it will be safe from him here." "Mo doesn't think so." Dustfinger straightened up and stared at the library door. "Yes, I know," he murmured. "That's the trouble. And so," he said, putting both hands on Meggie's shoulders and propelling her toward the closed door, "so now you're going to go in there, the picture of innocence, and find out what the pair of them are planning to do with that book. Okay?" Meggie was about to protest, but before she knew it, Dustfinger had opened the door and pushed her into the library. That's the end of Chapter 4. Again, I thank you very much for joining me. And, Mystic thanks you too. She enjoys sitting here listening to me read. And I hope you'll join me next time for Chapter 5. Bye!